Well, I'm sorry I can't be here today in person with you. Just a few hours ago, actually, well after I pre-recorded this talk, I was at a ceremony in Sydney as a finalist in the Australian of the Year award. It was one of those "and the winner is" announcements, and so right now I am as curious as you are about how I will go and whether I in fact was selected as the New South Wales state winner to go into the national final, and then that's announced on Australia Day in January. So I suppose you're all wondering now whether you're looking at the winner or at some rather pathetic has-been who's never to be heard of again, and who for years later will probably be boring his grandchildren by opening up an old website listing the finalists who didn't get to the starting or to the finish line in 2008. Anyway, I can console myself somewhat with a large dose of self-righteousness about all the carbon emissions that I'm saving by not flying all the way from Sydney and back. Seriously, I think that there should be much more of what you are seeing now. Conferences cause massive carbon emissions. Today, I want to talk about two kinds of public health research. A common variety, which disappears without trace, sometimes after occupying research teams for several years, and a rarer type, that which attracts attention, influences ways of thinking, and ultimately makes a real difference. I'll commence with some general points about what characterises influential and non-influential research. I'll move to some illustrations of influential Australian tobacco control research, which is my main area of interest. Internationally, Australia and Canada, they duke it out for the prize for the nation which has reduced tobacco use further than any other. We're down to 17% daily usage. I think Canada is a little bit less than that now. I come to this subject after having spent tens of thousands of hours over the past 30 years applying for grants, undertaking research, and then publishing over 350 papers and 14 books describing the findings and the implications arising from that research. I've also had the privilege of spending the past 17 years as the editor of a research journal, Tobacco Control. In recent years, we have received an average of about 400 manuscripts a year, and we've been able to publish only about 15% of those. The team of senior editors that I work with has had to read an enormous amount of research and make judgments about papers. With colleagues, I've also recently been awarded a grant to look at the characteristics of influential public health research and researchers in Australia. Here, I recently met with a former long-term political premier in my home state who now takes an active role in promoting public health reform. I asked him if he would become a sounding board for the project in its early phase in trying to best understand how research might influence politicians. Some of his comments, which I'll come to shortly, were very revealing and are totally consistent with what we know from the relatively small research literature on this area. So let me start first by talking about useless research. By this, I mean research which is never used. Hardly anyone ever reads it or hears about it, and of course if no one ever reads it, it doesn't get a chance to inspire anything else. The first step towards having people read your research is obviously to get it published. Now, like most journals, we reject at Tobacco Control many papers prior to review. There is simply no point in having something reviewed if the economic reality of research publishing limits the number of papers that we can afford to publish, and that is a very hard reality. When we winnow, we've come to realise that there are more or less instinctive reject and review factors at play. The reject factors include the usual things bound up with weak research designs or unwarranted conclusions, but before any of that sort of stuff is considered, editors are concerned primarily about whether what they are reading is saying anything important or something that has never been shown before or not shown as powerfully before. Both as a researcher and as an editor, the first question I always ask is this research in front of me answering a question that lots of people, and particularly key people able to change policy, are actually asking or might be interested in. Is it likely to play a part in changing anything for lots of people, or sometimes, of course, making a case for preserving something? But even though we and our reviewers at the journal winnow papers that we judge less interesting, original or methodologically sound, we still let many papers through that readers in fact don't find interesting at all. The most basic measure of this is citation. Sir Richard Peto, the Oxford epidemiologist, is probably one of the most influential researchers in public health today. Richard has published 513 papers in journals indexed by the Web of Science. These have been cited a remarkable 80,000 times. He has a stratospheric H-index of 110. He's got 38 publications which have been cited over 500 times and 18 which have been cited over 1,000 times. But really interestingly, even Richard Peto has 118 publications which have never been cited by anyone, nearly 1 in 4 of all that he's written. So if nearly a quarter of Richard Peto's publications have never even been cited by another researcher, what about us mere mortals in the room today? Research on uncitedness shows that 93% of papers in the humanities are never cited, and 48% of papers in the social sciences. Health and medicine do a lot better, with 22% being uncited. And this next slide that I'll show shows the proportion of papers in the 3 leading tobacco research journals which have never been cited. And as you can see, quite substantial numbers.